The mirror image in the park. When Mom saw the girl in the wheelchair who looked exactly like me, she went pale and dragged me away from the park. A few weeks later, I learned the truth my parents had hidden for 35 years. This was my twin sister, whom they had given up at birth. That day in Portland started as a routine business trip. I needed to pick up documents from the insurance office, and Mom decided to come along. She'd been wanting to visit that bookstore on Burnside that her friend had told her about. After handling all our business, we had time before heading home, so we decided to take a walk through Laurelhurst Park. The October day was surprisingly warm for Oregon. Mom stopped to feed the ducks by the pond, and I continued down the path, enjoying the rare sunshine. That's when I saw her. A girl in a wheelchair was coming toward me along the walkway. Something about her face made me slow down. Dark shoulder-length hair, the same chestnut shade as mine, just styled differently. The shape of her face, the set of her eyes, even a mole on her left cheek in the exact same spot as mine. She was thinner, which was natural for someone confined to a wheelchair. But the resemblance struck me so powerfully that I couldn't help but smile. The girl also looked at me with surprise, and for a second, her wheelchair slowed down. We passed each other. I continued walking down the path while she rolled on. But I turned around after a few steps and saw that she had also stopped and was looking back at me. Mom came up to me a few minutes later, and I, laughing cheerfully, told her about the amusing coincidence. What happened next still haunts me. Mom first just stopped, listening to my words. Then her face changed, as if all the blood had drained from it. She looked toward where the girl in the wheelchair had gone, and I saw something like horror in her eyes. Mom asked where exactly I had seen her. When I pointed toward the fountain and started telling her what an amazing coincidence it was, Mom abruptly cut me off, saying we needed to leave because her head was starting to hurt. She took my hand, not roughly, but insistently. The whole drive home to Salem, Mom was silent and nervous. When I asked what had upset her so much, she answered in monosyllables, but I could see how tensely she gripped the steering wheel, how she avoided looking at me when I mentioned that girl again. The next Tuesday, when I came to my parents for dinner, as I usually did every week, the atmosphere was strange. Mom avoided conversations with me, bustled around the kitchen more than usual. At the table, I decided to tell Dad about our trip to Portland and mentioned the funny encounter with the girl who looked so much like me. Dad choked on his food. Mom dropped her fork. They exchanged glances so quickly I barely caught it, but that look was full of some kind of understanding. Dad uncertainly said that people sometimes look alike, and tried to remember a classmate of mine from school who had also looked like me. Mom too quickly picked up on this topic, suggesting we talk about something else instead, asking about my work. They were clearly trying to change the subject, and it was so unnatural that I felt something was wrong here. My parents had never behaved this way. 5 sleepless nights finally convinced me I needed to get to the bottom of this situation. The strange feeling that had settled in me after the encounter in the park wouldn't leave me alone. It was more than just curiosity about the resemblance. Something deep and instinctive told me the meeting wasn't accidental. I started with simple internet searches. Portland is a big city, but the disability community is more tight-knit, especially those who lead active lifestyles. I found several social media groups dedicated to people with disabilities in Oregon. Carefully, without naming names, I posted in one of the Facebook groups describing the girl I had met in Laurelhurst Park. I gave her approximate age, physical description, the type of wheelchair I remembered. I wrote that I wanted to meet her because it seemed like we might have met somewhere before. The response came faster than I expected. A woman named Carol wrote to me privately that the description sounded very much like Samantha Johnson, whom she knew through the Independent Living Center in Portland. Carol gave me a link to Samantha's page and the center's phone number. When I opened Samantha's social media profile, my heart skipped a beat. Even in the photograph, even though she was sitting, the resemblance was striking. We weren't just similar. We were like two versions of the same person. She had a shorter haircut and looked more physically fragile. But the facial features, the expression in her eyes, even the way she smiled, everything was identical. I scrolled through more of her photos. Samantha Johnson, 35 years old, graphic designer, works remotely. Disability rights activist, enjoys photography and travel as her condition allows. And her birth date, March 15th, 1989. My birthday. And matching birth dates finally convinced me that something wasn't right here. I called the Independent Living Center and asked to be connected with Samantha Johnson. I said I wanted to commission a logo design for my small business. Samantha agreed to meet in 2 days at a cafe near the center. Her voice was pleasant, a little raspy, and her manner of speaking reminded me of my own. We arranged for me to come at 2 in the afternoon. Those 2 days, I barely slept. Thoughts swarmed in my head, building the most incredible theories. Maybe we're distant relatives? Maybe our mothers were friends and got pregnant at the same time? But the birth date was too exact a coincidence. When I walked into the cafe and saw Samantha, the world seemed to freeze. She was sitting at a table by the window, and sunlight fell on her face exactly the way it fell on my face every morning when I drank coffee at home. It was like looking at myself in a mirror, only the mirror showed a different version of my life. Samantha also froze when she saw me. Her eyes widened, and for several seconds we just looked at each other, unable to say a word. The first minutes of conversation were awkward. I tried to play the role of a client interested in design, but we both understood that wasn't what this was about. Finally, Samantha directly asked me why I had really come. I told her about the meeting in the park, about the strange feeling of recognition, about the matching birth dates. Samantha listened carefully, and I could see the same thoughts that had been tormenting me reflected in her eyes. It turned out she had also felt something unusual when we met in the park. Samantha told me she had always known she was adopted. Her adoptive parents, James and Mary Johnson, had never hidden this fact. They adopted her as an infant when she was only a few months old. The Johnsons were amazing people. James worked as a physical therapist, Mary as a special education teacher. They had 2 children of their own, but after a complicated cesarean section, doctors said they couldn't have more children. However, James and Mary felt there was room in their family for 2 more children and decided to help special needs children. First, they adopted a boy with Down syndrome, and a year later, they took Samantha. They had experience, specialized knowledge, financial resources, and could provide children with special needs everything necessary. Samantha grew up surrounded by love and care, received an excellent education, and never felt unwanted. but she had always dreamed of learning about her biological family, not because of lack of love in her adopted family, but from the natural human desire to know her roots. The Johnsons supported her interest, but searches led nowhere. Samantha told me about her diagnosis: cerebral palsy, spastic diplegia, the result of oxygen deprivation during birth. The condition mainly affected her legs. Her arms functioned almost normally, which allowed her to work as a designer. Her intellect wasn't affected. Moreover, Samantha graduated college with honors and was an incredibly well-read conversationalist. We talked in the cafe until evening. The more we learned about each other, the more coincidences we discovered. We had the same preferences in food, music, books. We were both left-handed, though we'd learned to write with our right hands. We both had allergies to strawberries and the strange habit of chewing on pens when we think. But most striking was how we reacted to the same things, how we laughed at the same jokes, how we wrinkled our brows identically when concentrating. This was more than similarity. It was identity on some deep level. At the end of our meeting, we exchanged contacts, and I promised to find a way to verify our suspicions. Samantha admitted she had also long felt that somewhere she had a close relative, possibly a sister or brother. Her adoptive parents had told her that her biological mother was very young and couldn't care for a child with special needs. The drive home I don't remember. My thoughts were confused. My heart was pounding. If my theory was correct, if Samantha really was my sister, it meant my parents had been hiding the truth from me for 35 years. It meant there was a girl somewhere they had given up because she wasn't born like me. At home, I decided to find at least some leads. I went to my parents and told Mom I wanted to pick up old documents for taxes. Mom said she and Dad would be at work until evening, but I had keys, so I could wait for them at home. Left alone in my childhood home, I went to my former bedroom, which now served as Mom's office. Officially, I was looking for tax documents, but I was actually interested in something completely different. I began searching for documents related to my birth certificate, hospital discharge papers, childhood medical records. In an old box on the top shelf of the closet, I found a medical record with my first entries. Most of the text was routine, but in one place, several lines were thickly crossed out with black ink. Crossed out so thoroughly and in multiple layers that it was impossible to read anything. Why would someone need to so carefully hide information in my childhood medical record? My hands were shaking as I photographed the documents on my phone. This wasn't enough for final conclusions, but enough to understand I was on the right track. I called Mom and said I had an urgent matter come up and wouldn't be able to wait for them. Relief sounded in her voice when she answered that it was fine. The next morning, I took time off work and drove to Portland, to St. Vincent's Hospital, where, according to documents, I was born. In the archives department, they explained that medical records from 35 years ago were kept in closed archives, and only patients or their legal representatives had access with valid reasons. I told the duty nurse that I suspected the existence of a twin who might have been given up at birth, and that this was important for my medical history. The nurse, a woman about 50 with kind eyes, listened to me carefully and said she would make a request to the archives. After 2 hours of waiting, she returned with a thick folder. Medical records of Elizabeth Thompson's delivery. My mother, March 15th, 1989. Twins, Dichorionic pregnancy. First child, girl, weight 2.8 kilograms, healthy. Second child, girl, weight 2.4 kilograms, birth asphyxia, cerebral palsy. The documents told the story I had feared to hear. Mom had a difficult labor that lasted 22 hours. I was born first, without complications. Samantha was born 17 minutes later, but the umbilical cord was wrapped around her neck, and she couldn't breathe on her own for a long time. Oxygen deprivation damaged the areas of the brain responsible for movement. The records showed that I stayed with Mom in the room for 3 days. Then we were discharged home. Samantha remained in the newborn intensive care unit all this time. After our discharge, the parents came to visit her every day. Doctors explained to them the extent of damage and long-term prognosis. In 1989, medical prognoses for children with cerebral palsy were much more pessimistic than now. Doctors said the child might never be able to walk, speak, might require constant care. Young parents, Mom was only 23, were told that raising such a child would require enormous resources and could destroy the family. The last entry in the medical record was dated April 1st, 1989. Parents signed relinquishment for second child. Child transferred to state custody for subsequent placement in specialized institution or adoptive family. I sat in the hospital corridor and cried, holding these terrible documents. My sister existed. 35 years ago, my parents had made a choice between 2 daughters and chose the healthy one. The nurse brought me water and quietly said that in those times, such decisions were made often. The support system for families with special children practically didn't exist. Rehabilitation programs were primitive, and social stigma was enormous. Many parents felt they couldn't handle such responsibility. She also said the archives showed Samantha was adopted just a month after birth. Social worker at the hospital had suggested the parents consider adoption for the second child, assuring them the girl would be placed with a specialized family experienced in raising special children. But the adoption system worked so that biological and adoptive families knew nothing about each other. This was complete confidentiality to protect all parties. That same evening, I met with Samantha again. I showed her copies of the medical documents. We sat in her small but cozy apartment, adapted for someone in a wheelchair, and tried to comprehend the revealed truth. Samantha took the news more calmly than I expected. She said she had always felt that her story didn't begin from birth itself, that somewhere there was a missing chapter. Learning she had a twin sister was shocking, but at the same time, it explained many things. She told me more about her adoptive parents. James and Mary were incredible people who gave her not only love, but every opportunity for development. They took her to the best rehabilitation centers, provided special education, supported all her interests. Samantha didn't regret for a second how her life had turned out. She was grateful to fate for ending up with the Johnsons specifically. But now that she knew about the existence of her biological family, she wanted to understand why her parents had made such a decision. We talked until deep into the night, telling each other about our lives. It turned out we had grown up just 2 hours' drive from each other, but our paths had never crossed. I had studied in Salem, worked for an insurance company, married at 28, but divorced 3 years later. I didn't have children. Samantha graduated from Portland University with a degree in graphic design and marketing. She had never been married, though there had been serious relationships. She worked remotely with clients across the country, specializing in creating branding for small companies. We discovered we had the same fears and dreams, similar sense of humor, identical reactions to stress. Samantha admitted she had always felt incomplete, as if somewhere there was the other half of her personality. The next day, I went to my parents. The whole way there, I rehearsed how to start this conversation, how to tell people who had raised me, given me everything best, that I knew their most terrible secret. Mom immediately understood from my face that I had learned something. When I took out copies of the medical documents, she went pale and sank onto the couch. Dad didn't understand at first what this was about, but when Mom started crying, the truth dawned on him. They told me their version of the story. Mom and Dad married at 20. I was their first pregnancy. When they learned it would be twins, they were happy, though frightened. The young family's financial situation was difficult. The birth became a nightmare. Mom told how after 22 hours of agony, doctors said something was wrong with one child. When Samantha finally was born, she didn't breathe for several minutes. Resuscitation saved her life, but brain damage was irreversible. The first 3 days, the parents were in the hospital with me until I was discharged. But every day after discharge, they came to visit Samantha in intensive care. 2 weeks became the most terrible in my parents' lives. Every day, they looked at their daughter in intensive care, connected to machines, and listened to doctors' explanations about what her life would be like. Doctors explained to them that a child with cerebral palsy would require constant medical care, special education, expensive rehabilitation programs. In 1989, insurance covered only a small part of such expenses. A young family without higher education and stable work simply couldn't afford it. Mom cried, telling how they spent several sleepless nights discussing options. They considered taking loans, asking relatives for help, but everyone understood this wouldn't be enough for long. A social worker at the hospital suggested they consider adoption for the second child. She explained there were families specializing in raising children with special needs who could give the child everything necessary. But the system worked so that no one could tell the parents who exactly would adopt the girl. This was strict confidentiality. They could only be promised she would end up in a good family with experience and resources. The decision was incredibly difficult for the parents. Mom said she changed her mind several times, but in the end, they understood they were giving up their daughter not because they didn't love her, but precisely because they loved her and wanted the best life for her. Dad told how they visited Samantha for the last time before signing the relinquishment papers. She lay in the crib, tiny and helpless, and Dad swore to himself that someday, when they had the means, they would find her and explain their decision. But years passed. The family's financial situation improved. Dad got a good job. Mom finished bookkeeping courses. They tried several times to get information about Samantha through adoption services, but the system protected everyone's confidentiality. They were only told the girl was alive, healthy, and being raised in a good family. The more time passed, the harder it became to explain the truth to me. How do you tell your daughter she has a sister the parents gave up? How do you explain they kept one child and gave away another? Mom admitted that every day, for 35 years, she thought about Samantha, prayed for her, imagined what she had grown up to be. Every one of my birthdays was for Mom not only a celebration, but a reminder of her second daughter. Mom's reaction to the meeting in the park now made sense. Seeing Samantha, Mom instantly recognized her as her daughter. The resemblance was so strong There was no doubt. But fear and guilt paralyzed her. She didn't know how to react to this meeting after so many years. Dad had been silent all this time, but when Mom finished her story, he said they had never stopped loving Samantha, and that the decision to give her up was the hardest in their lives. They made it not from indifference, but from love, wanting to give their daughter better opportunities than they could provide themselves. The next few days, we all processed what had happened. I regularly called Samantha, told her about my parents' reaction, about their explanations. Samantha listened carefully and with understanding. She told me she felt no anger toward her biological parents. On the contrary, she was grateful to them for making such a difficult decision. If they had tried to raise her themselves, without the necessary resources and knowledge, her life could have turned out very differently. The Johnsons had given her not only medical help and special education, but most importantly, they taught her not to see her special needs as limitations. Samantha grew up understanding that disability is just one characteristic of a person, not defining their worth or possibilities. A week after our conversation with my parents, I suggested organizing a meeting. Samantha agreed, though she admitted to being a little nervous. My parents were also worried, but understood this step was necessary for all of us. The meeting took place at a neutral location, the cafe in Portland, where Samantha and I had first met. Mom entered first, and seeing Samantha, went pale again. But this time she didn't try to leave. They looked at each other for several minutes in complete silence. Then Mom approached Samantha's wheelchair, knelt down, and quietly said she was sorry. Samantha took Mom's hand and answered that she had nothing to forgive her for, thanking her for giving her life and making the right choice for her. This was the beginning of a process that lasted several months. We slowly, carefully built relationships as a whole family. Samantha told my parents about her life, about the Johnsons, about her achievements and plans. My parents shared stories about my childhood with all of us, showed photographs, told family anecdotes. It turned out Samantha had many traits in common, not only with me, but with my parents. She had Dad's stubbornness and Mom's creativity. She loved the same books Dad read and could spend hours discussing interior design with Mom. Gradually, we began including Samantha in family traditions. On Thanksgiving, we gathered all together for the first time in 35 years. Samantha came to our house, and Mom prepared all her favorite dishes she had learned about over these months. The Johnsons responded to the reunion with understanding and support. James told me he had always hoped Samantha would someday find her biological family, and that he was glad to see her happy. Mary added that for them, Samantha would always be their daughter, but now she had more people who loved her. We agreed to maintain connections between the two families. The Johnsons were invited to my birthday, which now became Samantha's birthday too. It was an amazing celebration. For the first time in 35 years, we celebrated twin sisters' birthday together. 8 people sat around the table. Biological parents, adoptive parents, me, Samantha, and the Johnsons' older children who had always considered Samantha their younger sister. It was a strange and beautiful blend of two families united by love for one person. That evening, Mom brought out a box she had kept all these years. In it were Samantha's things from the hospital, a tiny pink hat, first booties, a bracelet with her name from the maternity ward. Mom admitted she could never throw these things away. They were the only material connection to the daughter she had given up. Samantha took the bracelet in her hands and quietly said she now understood where her lifelong feeling of being part of something bigger had come from. The Johnsons told us that when they picked her up from the hospital, a nurse handed them an envelope with these things and said the biological mother had really asked them to save them for the girl. In the following months, our lives changed dramatically. I moved to Portland to be closer to Samantha. I found a new job at an insurance company with better conditions and settled in an apartment in the same neighborhood where my sister lived. We began spending most of our free time together. Samantha showed me her favorite places in the city, took me to museums and galleries that were adapted for people with disabilities. I was amazed at how active and full her social life was. Through her, I met an amazing community of people with various special needs who didn't let their diagnoses define the boundaries of their lives. These were artists, writers, athletes, activists, people who had fulfilled themselves completely, despite physical limitations. Samantha became my guide to a world I had never known existed. She showed me that disability isn't a tragedy, but simply a different way of existing in the world. Her life was full, bright, and meaningful, perhaps even more so than mine. We discovered amazing things about twin connection that had persisted despite 35 years of separation. We often had the same thoughts at the same time. We could sense each other's emotional state, even at a distance. One night, I woke up with acute anxiety and called Samantha. It turned out she was having a seizure that sometimes happens with her form of cerebral palsy, and she was just about to call an ambulance. I came to her and spent the night in the hospital while doctors stabilized her condition. This incident brought us all even closer. My parents realized they had lost 35 years of being able to be near their daughter in difficult moments, and now they wanted to make up for that lost time. Mom began studying information about cerebral palsy, reading medical articles, consulting with doctors. She wanted to understand what challenges Samantha faced daily and how the family could support her. Dad, who had worked with his hands all his life, offered to adapt the house in Salem for Samantha's visits. He installed ramps, widened doorways, equipped a special bathroom. The house became fully accessible, and Samantha could come visit us on weekends. These visits became special moments for the whole family. We cooked together, watched old family movies, played board games. Samantha told stories from her life, and my parents shared memories of my childhood. Gradually, we created new family traditions that included all of us. At Christmas, we now gathered at the Johnsons' house, which was bigger and better adapted for a large group. In summer, we had picnics in the park where we first met. Samantha helped me look at many things in life from a new perspective. Her ability to find joy in simple things, her optimism and love of life, despite physical limitations, inspired me to rethink my own priorities. I began doing volunteer work at the Independent Living Center, where I had met Samantha. I helped other people with disabilities master computer programs I knew from my work at the insurance company. This gave me a sense of greater purpose in life. A year after our reunion, Samantha suggested we travel together. She had long dreamed of visiting Yellowstone National Park, but traveling alone was difficult. We planned a 2-week trip through national parks, adapting the route to Samantha's capabilities. This trip became one of the brightest memories of my life. Samantha and I discovered the beauty of nature for each other, shared thoughts about life, made plans for the future. I saw how Samantha adapted to different conditions, how she found ways to overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. My parents, who had initially worried about our trip, received daily photo reports from us. Mom later admitted Those 2 weeks were among the happiest for her. She saw that both her daughters were living full lives and enjoying each other's company. When we returned from the trip, we connected with other families who had gone through similar experiences. Some stories ended in reunion like ours, others didn't. But in all cases, we saw that the decision to give up a child was made from love, not indifference. One woman we spoke with told us she had given up a child with Down syndrome 30 years ago, and that this decision had saved her marriage and allowed her to give a better life to her older son. At the same time, she never stopped loving the child she gave up and dreamed of meeting him. These stories helped me finally understand and accept my parents' decision. They weren't bad people. They were young and frightened parents who made an incredibly difficult choice under limited circumstances. Now, 3 years after our meeting in the park, I can't imagine life without Samantha. We became not just sisters, but best friends, business partners, and support for each other in everything. Samantha moved to an apartment in the same building where I live, just 1 floor up. We see each other every day, work on joint projects, travel, make plans for the future. She became the godmother of my new business. I opened an agency for planning accessible tourism for people with disabilities. My parents also changed over these years. Mom became a volunteer at an organization supporting families with special children, sharing her experience with other parents. Dad helps adapt homes for people with disabilities. They speak openly about their decision 35 years ago. Don't hide their mistakes, but don't feel guilt either. They understand they did what they thought was best for everyone in that situation, and as a result, Samantha received a wonderful life with the Johnson family. James and Mary Johnson became real family members for all of us. We celebrate all holidays together, support each other in difficult times, share joys and achievements. Samantha now has 4 parents and a big loving family. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if we had never met in that park. Samantha would have continued living her full life. Mine. My parents would have taken their secret to the grave, but fate decided otherwise. Our story proved to me that family bonds are stronger than time and circumstances, that love doesn't disappear, even when the most difficult decisions are made, and that it's never too late to heal the past and build a new future. Today, when I look at Samantha, I don't see a person with a disability. I see my sister, my other half, the person who made my life fuller and richer. She taught me that limitations exist only in our minds, and that real disability is the inability to love and be loved. Our meeting in Laurelhurst Park changed the lives of 8 people. It reunited a family that had been divided by fear and circumstances. It showed that miracles happen when we're ready to open our hearts to the truth, even if that truth is painful. Next month, Samantha and I are planning another trip, this time to Europe. She's always dreamed of seeing the museums of Paris and Rome. I know this journey will become another beautiful memory in our collection of sisterly adventures, and my parents are already planning to join us for part of the trip. Mom wants to show Samantha places she once dreamed of visiting in her youth. Dad jokes that he'll have to master photography to capture all our adventures. Sometimes fate gives us a second chance. Sometimes what seems like a loss forever turns out to be just a temporary separation. Our story is proof that love is stronger than fear, that family isn't just blood ties, but the choice to be there for each other every day. And every time we walk through Laurelhurst Park, I remember that October day when I saw my reflection in a wheelchair. Now I know it wasn't a reflection. It was my sister, who had been waiting 35 years to meet me without knowing it. We're both complete, whole people now. We have a past that separated us, but we also have a future we're building together. And we have a present in which we're grateful every day to fate for the miracle that happened on an ordinary autumn day in a Portland park.